Yep.
Okay, so it's a fairly short presentation. I didn't want to make the presentation too long. You can give more time for discussions. A few things before I can start. I'm not an investment expert. I just happen to do a lot of investments since I came back from India. Just a brief background. I went to the US in 1987 and I studied there and then worked there until 2003. In 2003, we made a decision to return back to India for family reasons. So I've been living in India now for the last 17 years. Of course, I visit the US many times a year for business purposes and work purposes, but primary residence has been in India for the last 17 years. When I first moved here, we had no idea what was available here, what needs to be done here, etc. So a lot of what we did was through learning by trying out, by asking people. The trouble with asking people in India is that you ask one person, you get two answers. And so, particularly with what investments you're allowed to use or how you manage your taxes, it's a fairly complex subject here because most people here don't understand how things work in the US, and most people in the US don't understand how things work here. So, several different pieces of learning that we got. I haven't put every single thing in this presentation, but what I plan to do is to quickly run you through about 7 or 8 slides, which talks about highlights of what kind of investments are available to invest in India, and then leave it open for questions, which I think will be far more useful to people. Please feel free to ask questions either along the way or towards the end of the presentation, and I will do my best to answer as many questions as possible. Again, as I said, I'm not an investment expert nor I'm a tax expert. All I'm giving is based on my experiences. If you guys need any further clarity on some of the topics in more detail, then I can certainly connect you to the right people here who have been helping me with these topics, because these people are professionals who do this for a career, and I can connect you to them and they can give you more information about those topics. So with that, let's go to the first slide. Why invest in India? First question is that, people want to know, like, when I'm living in the US, why would I bother to invest in India? Before I go to that thing, there are two kinds of people I am addressing this to. One kind is what is called the typical NRI, the non-resident Indian. These are people with an Indian passport who happen to live in the US either on a US visa or on a green card. The second kind of people are people with Indian origin who are now US citizens. US citizens who have become citizens through naturalization. There are some subtle differences between these two kinds of people in terms of what can and cannot be done. I'll try and highlight that as much as I can throughout the presentation. But in terms of tax compliance, it's quite a bit different between NRIs and the US citizens. And again, I would advise you to consult with the tax advisor on that, because in India, they use the term NRI loosely to define anyone who is living abroad. They don't make this explicit difference between NRI and US citizens or OCI card holders. People just don't know about these differences enough to explain them. So they they call you an NRI regardless of whether you are a US citizen or whether you are an Indian citizen. So you have to be careful when people address you as NRI to be very specific on what exactly they mean by that. So why invest in India? The first thing is Indian economy will become the third largest. I think right now we are the fifth largest economy in the world. We'll become the third largest in the world by 2050 after the United States and China. So there is a lot of opportunity for us to grow along with the country. So currently it's in the fifth spot, followed by France and the UK. Global de-risking to drive new trade in India away from China. With this COVID situation and also other bilateral relationship between the US and China, there are quite a lot of investors in the US as well as companies in the US who are looking to expand their presence in India. I can give you a little bit more personal experience in that, because as part of my consulting expertise, I help companies in the US to establish their back office in India. I help companies with in the US to help with their global capability centers or high-tech centers in India, and we are seeing a lot of demand from companies who want to come to India at this point in time for setting up their operations. So global de-risking to drive new trade in India away from China. And as you know, India has a large younger demographic profile. It's a highly consumer-driven society. We're getting into a very highly consumer-driven society now. So there's a lot of opportunities for growth. Demand for every consumable, demand for every product and service is only increasing leaps and bounds here. Just to give an example, during this Diwali days, Flipkart and Amazon did more business. Together they did more business than what they did in the US. That's the kind of volumes we are talking about in terms of what they are buying and selling here. So opportunities in the US because of faster growth. Our GDP growth is also one of the highest in the world, which all points to good return on investments, etc. So one thing that you have to be aware of very clearly is that the biggest risk of investing in India is the currency risk. Our currency has devalued over the time. Just to give you an example, when I came back from the US in 2003, the India US currency was trading at 40 rupees to a dollar, and today it is at 74 rupees to a dollar. So you can understand that there is a risk with the currency getting devalued. The good news, however, is that in the last 2 3 years, the currency has been reasonably stable and steady. So if you had invested in the last 1 or 2 years, then you must have a good investment return without having to worry about the currency fluctuations. But that risk is always out there, and we need to be aware of it. The forecast from economists in India is that the currency will devalue slowly, but not as fast as it did earlier in the last 15 years. And eventually we may get up to close to 100 rupees to a dollar, but that may take a decade or more. That's what the predictions are at this point in time. So you have to keep that in mind when you are investing in India. So reasons for why someone should invest in India further. One reason is that existing connections with the motherland. Some people want to participate in the growth of the motherland. This is particularly true for people who want to park some portions of the money in India so that they can have some diversification in terms of global returns. So, and specifically with people coming from our country, you want to have the ability to participate in the growth of our country. So that's one good reason for investing in India. Second thing could be existing investments need to be managed. If you're going to be eventually planning to come to India, some people have that plan to come back to India either while they're in the working age or after retirement. Then if you're going to start investing in India, then existing investments need to be managed for the planned eventual return to India for people. And of course, the diversification of one's investments, India being the foremost emerging markets, offers the best opportunity for you to diversify your investment so that you can diversify in India as well. Okay. So with that, I just want to jump straight into the types of investment options. Again, this is fairly high level. Um, This is fairly high level. There are a couple of other slides I have on a little bit more detail, but let me start off with what kind of instruments are available. In the order of risk, start off with debt investments. These are relatively low risk. You can do fixed deposits, bonds, and debentures. Um, Fixed deposits meaning money you park with a bank or with a non-banking finance company. There are organizations in India called non-banking finance companies. These are companies that take deposits from investors, but they are not banks. They are usually lending companies. They lend for automobiles or for houses, etc. HDFC is one example of a non-banking financing company. HDFC Bank is a bank, but HDFC as an organization, the Housing Development Finance Corporation, is a non-banking financing company. Similarly, the TVS Group offers several Sundaram Finance and Sundaram Paribas Finance. A lot of other companies offer deposits which are different from banks. Typically, you see that the non-banking finance companies offer a slightly higher interest rate than the banks for fixed deposits. Fixed deposits again are money that is parked to the bank or NBFC for a fixed term at a fixed interest rate. And once the term expires, then the deposit matures, and you have the opportunity to either liquidate that and take the money, or you can reinvest back into the FD for a further term. The second one is bonds. These are bonds that could either be government bonds or corporate bonds. The Indian government, through its various public sector undertakings, issue bonds regularly. These are bonds with a fixed term as well, typically a period of 10 to 15 years. The interest that comes out of that bond is not taxable in India. So if you're looking for a tax-free investment in India, this is not taxable. Now, unfortunately, even though this is tax-free in India, when it comes to the US taxation, the interest that you get from these tax-free bonds are taxed in the US. So really, at the end of the day, this is not a tax-free bond for the US citizens, particularly for the US citizens, because you get taxed on the interest in the US. Of course, there are things called debentures, which are again fixed debt instruments where you provide a loan kind of money to the company to keep and they return you your interest. It is very similar to fixed deposit, except that some debentures can be converted into shares at a later stage. These are called convertible debentures. Fixed deposits again are offered by banks and non-banking financing companies. I will talk about what kind of fixed deposits are available to non-resident Indians and US citizens shortly in the next slide. The other debt instruments that are available are mutual funds. There are debt mutual funds available in India where the mutual fund company is going to invest your money largely in debt instruments. That doesn't mean all the money goes into debt. Typically, a debt mutual fund company would be investing between 60 to 70% of the assets in debt instruments. That could be a combination of government securities, could be in government bonds or corporate bonds or short-term money market instruments, and the rest would be in equity market. So there is higher risk in debt mutual funds than in fixed deposits or bonds and debentures, because there is a small capital risk associated with debt mutual funds. There are many different mutual fund companies that are available to invest. When I first came here in 2003, I could invest in any mutual fund here without any problem. But now in 2008, there was an agreement that was signed between the US and India called FATCA, Foreign Account and Compliance Law, which makes it essential for Indian mutual fund companies to report any investments made by US citizens or US NRI back to the US. The reason being that for the longest time, a lot of people abroad were parking their money in mutual funds in India, and those investments were invisible to the US. So they were not paying taxes in the US. So this FATCA rule was established bilaterally. So US citizens and NRIs who invest in India, their investments are automatically reported by these mutual funds back to the US government, and vice versa. If you have an Indian citizen who has invested money in, or an Indian resident who has invested money in the US, those investments are also reported back to the tax people in India. So it's a bilateral agreement that they have. It is a fairly complicated agreement. So I would say that if any of you have investments, already existing investments in India or planning to have new investments in India, you certainly should talk to your tax advisor in the US as well as to a tax advisor in India to understand the implications of FATCA. The reason I'm bringing that topic up now is that previously all mutual funds were accepting investments from NRIs and US citizens. Once this FATCA rule came in place, the amount of compliance work that these mutual funds had to do increased significantly to the point that some mutual funds stopped taking investments from US citizens and NRIs. I believe many of them have reopened again. I know that HDFC, ICICI, and a few other funds accept investments in mutual funds from US citizens and NRIs, but you have to check with the specific mutual fund company to see if they accept it. When you approach them, you have to be very clear, saying that you are either an NRI or a US citizen, because some of them accept from NRIs but not from US citizens. So you have to be very clear and very specific about what your status is, so that the mutual fund company can tell you. Now, unfortunately, the people who come to sell mutual funds to your houses, the junior employees, they don't know any difference at all about it. You need to speak to someone senior in the mutual fund company. And if any of you are wanting to have some contacts, I have been able to establish contacts with some of the mutual fund managers through my investments here. And I reach out to them when I get questions that are not answered by these people at the lower level, and they are able to answer the questions for the most part. The other kind of investments, second one is equity investments. It could be either in the form of equity shares, which you can own directly, or portfolio management schemes. Equity shares are, you're basically owning shares of a publicly listed company. I have a few, one slide after that saying exactly how you do that. Then you also have what is called portfolio management schemes. These are basically, the best way to describe them are customized mutual funds. Several investment companies offer you this PMS schemes. PMS schemes are somewhat similar to sector funds in the US. It's somewhat similar to sector funds, except that in this case, is the mutual fund manager, portfolio management scheme manager, decides the specific kind of combination of stocks that are being held in your name. So each PMS is specific to an individual investor, and they could be a combination of stocks, bonds, or other instruments based on your investment risk and based on your requirements and needs. These PMS schemes are not offered by all companies, only a few companies offer the PMS schemes. I have a few of them in my portfolio. And as I said, some of them are targeted based on the sectors. I have some healthcare PMS schemes. I also have industrials and manufacturing PMS schemes as well, which invest primarily in industrials and manufacturing companies. Typically, you see a higher rate of return from the portfolio management schemes. Again, the portfolio management schemes are largely investing in equity shares of various companies. Whereas in terms of equity shares, you're owning the equity share of one company. You could have create your own bucket of multiple equity shares from multiple companies, which will essentially be similar to a portfolio management scheme, except that the portfolio management scheme is managed by a investment manager, whereas your bucket of shares is managed by yourself. In addition to the equity shares in the portfolio management, you also have equity mutual funds, very similar to debt mutual funds. These are mutual funds which invest primarily in equity, but not exclusively in equity. So a typical equity mutual fund will be investing in about 75% in equity and the rest in debt and money market instruments. Um, there are also other alternate investments available, such as private equity and VC funds. These are typically in India targeted towards investments in real estate. There are some VC funds that also take money and invest in startups and Series A companies. There are many US-based VC companies now have a presence in India who take money from high net worth individuals. Typical entrance amount for investments in VC funds is 25 lakhs. Similarly, the portfolio management schemes I said about, the typical minimum investment would be somewhere about 10 lakhs to 15 lakhs. So you have PE and VC. Now, PE funds are typically people who invest there are typically corporations or very large investors. So I wouldn't say PE is as common with people in India as much as VC funds. Of course, there are also angel investors, individual angel investors who invest in startups. I'm also an angel investor in India, a registered angel investor in India, and I invest in startups in India. Angel investors are mostly independent investors who invest in their own, but there are also consortiums of angel investors who invest together in a company. There is an organization in Chennai which I am part of, is called the Chennai Angels, which is basically a combination of people who are based in Chennai or who originally from Chennai. We pool our money together and we invest in startups after doing due diligence. So again, as you see in the equity instruments, there could be various levels of risk involved. A typical equity share has a medium to high risk. A portfolio management scheme correspondingly could have the same level of risk. Equity mutual funds are slightly lesser risk because they are much more broadly diversified and managed by a professional equity fund manager. Inside equity mutual funds, you have various kinds of funds depending upon the level of risk you're willing to take. There could be small cap, mid cap, or large cap funds. Small cap funds typically invest in smaller companies. The risk is high and so is the reward. Mid cap and large cap funds. And there are also mixed cap funds which invest in a combination of all this depending upon the risk profile that you have. So you have a wide variety of what they call investment schemes. So you have mutual fund companies and there are mutual fund schemes under each company. Each fund that they offer is called a scheme. So under the scheme, you can invest money. You could own multiple schemes of the same mutual fund company. all those information gets reported both by the mutual fund company as well as the regulator. The regulator in India, much like the SEC, the Security and Exchange Commission in the US, the regulator in India is called SEBI, SCBI. SEBI does essentially the same job as what SEC does in regulating the equity markets, as well as the P and the mutual fund market as well. You get reports from the mutual fund companies, plus also you get money from the regulator as well. The regulator's information is basically aggregated. If you have funds in multiple mutual fund companies, then the regulator aggregates all the information, sends you a nice report based on your PAN number. A PAN number that is required to invest in India is similar to a social security number. The PAN number is used for multiple purposes. I think most of you may be aware of what a PAN number is. It's a personal account number issued by the Government of India, Ministry of Finance. It's primarily used for filing your taxes in India, but it is also required for opening investments of any kind, whether it's a FD or a debt instrument or equity instrument. You need a PAN number for anything and everything now. Lately, Indian government has also introduced the Aadhaar card, which is a card which provides identification as a resident of the country. So you need Aadhaar card for most investments now as well, particularly with banks. When you open an account with a bank, they'll be asking for an Aadhaar card. So you need a PAN card for opening investments and Aadhaar card in most places. And the equity shares have been doing very well. I can tell you that in the last 10 years, they returned handsomely, much more than what equity instruments in the US return. And tax implications in India on debt mutual funds and equity mutual funds were quite generous. If you hold the debt mutual fund for a period of originally for more than 3 years, there was no tax on the dividend. Similarly, long-term capital gains on the equity shares and equity mutual funds were not taxed in India. However, with the new law tax law that changed in 2019, they are now taxing long-term capital gains at 10%. The debt mutual funds have to be held for 5 years minimum now before we can avoid taxes. So there has been some tightening of the tax laws to generate more income for the government from all these investments. Again, these are all details that change on a regular basis. There are lots of fine print items underneath all these things which a tax advisor can help you. Tax software in India is not very good. I can tell you that. You're much better off going to a regular chartered accountant to do the taxes, because tax software in India is not very accurate. Unlike TurboTax or other tax software in the US, which is much better, at least more or less accurate. Here, tax software in India is still maturing and it's not very accurate. The other investments that you can consider, which are higher risk investments, or real estate. Inside real estate, you can either invest in a real estate PE fund, or recently Indian government has started what is called an REIT, Real Estate Investment Trust. That's a fairly new instrument that was introduced by the Indian government. The REIT works very similar to the REIT in the US, where you pool money and then the company that provides the REIT invests in commercial property for rent, and they pay you a return based on the amount of money that they generate. The real estate PE is a different kind. Real estate PE, where you invest money, minimum investments would be usually 25 to 50 lakhs in a real estate PE fund. And the PE fund usually works with developers, property developers, where they fund the land acquisition as well as the building for the property developers, and you make money both on the equity in the property as well as on any interest that is paid by the property developer back to the PE company. It's a fairly complex instrument. I would not recommend for someone who's starting out first, because you need to understand a lot of variables before you can invest in that. I do have a few real estate PE investments. They are high risk, particularly in the last 2 years when the housing market has been very soft. The returns have been not very attractive. But when they are doing well, the returns are much better than any instrument you can think of. You can also have your own home and real estate of your own, or commercial or farms. Those are all various different kinds of investments. The one thing about farms is that US citizens are not allowed to own agricultural property. So if you're a US citizen, then you cannot own an agricultural property, which means you can't have a farm. But NRIs can own farms because they're Indian citizens. You have to be careful because people, when they sell you property, they don't know you're a US citizen and they gladly sell you an agricultural property, which is not allowed as per the Indian laws. Of course, you can always invest in gold and other variations of gold. There is also exchange traded funds available in India, much like what is there in the US. And we also have a gold ETF. If you don't want to hold physical gold, you can also invest in what is called gold ETF, exchange traded funds, where they invest money in paper gold. The return on that is very similar to that of real gold, except that you don't have to hold the gold in paper. There is a small amount of risk in having somebody else hold the paper gold instead of you actually physically holding the gold. Physically holding the gold has a risk that it may get stolen or lost. The paper traded gold, unless depending upon the companies, you have to find good companies that offer you gold ETF to invest in them. There are many who offer gold ETF, some in the private sector who are not regulated. So you have to be very, very careful. The unregulated gold market is very big in India and it's high risk but high return as well. So you have to be very careful where you're putting your money there. Of course, there is always opportunity for investing in business ventures where you could be a partner. The only difference in starting a company in India here is that you need to have at least one director of the company who's an Indian citizen. A company with all US citizens cannot be started in India. One of the directors has to be mandatorily an Indian citizen. Others can be US citizens for private companies. And then, of course, there are a lot of regulatory compliance issues. The same kind of company structures like LLC, LLP, all that is available in India. There is no such thing as a C company or a C corporation or S corporation in India. It's basically a private limited company, and there are certain rules and regulations in terms of how a private limited company operates. If you want to start your own company, you are allowed to start your own company in India, subject to those regulations under that. The other opportunity is franchising. You can franchise a business. It's become very popular to franchise US based businesses here, particularly in the food and the beverage industry. You also have fashion industry, which has some franchises in this country as well. Franchising works very much similar to how it works in the US. You pay a fixed amount of money upfront to get the rights to sell the goods and services, and you can establish agreement with the US company, any company in the world. Okay. Now, in terms of it's a little bit more detail on what kind of products that NRIs can invest in India. In terms of fixed deposit bank accounts, there are essentially three kinds of accounts that are available for NRIs and US citizens. They are non-resident external accounts, non-resident ordinary account, and foreign currency non-resident account. The non-resident external account is where you invest money in US dollars. It gets converted into Indian rupees at the time of investment and held in Indian rupees at a rate of interest specified by the bank or the company that is investing. The advantage of an NRE account is that when you decide to liquidate the account, the money is reconverted back into US dollars at the existing rate. So if you invest money, let's say at a rate of 75 rupees to a dollar, and after 3 years, when you take the money back, it is 80 rupees to a dollar, then your reconversion back to dollars will happen at 80. So there is a currency risk in that. Typically, NRE accounts pay you a slightly lower interest than NRO. NRO is basically like a regular bank deposit, except that the money can be either coming from the US in dollars or you can invest money in rupees from India as well. A non-resident ordinary account is generally required for any investments that a non-resident has in India. You are not allowed to open a regular resident account in India. A lot of people who in the US have residence accounts in India, which is actually not allowed. If you are living in the US, if you're a non-resident or a US citizen, the option you have is a non-resident ordinary account. The third one is a foreign currency non-resident. In this, the difference between foreign currency non-resident and a non-resident external account is that here, when you invest money in US dollars, it does not get converted. It is held and maintained in US dollars and returned back to you in US dollars. So there is no currency risk with the FCNR account. The interest rates on the FCNR account are not that much different from an interest rate you get in the US. It's slightly higher than what you get in the US, maybe a point or two higher than what kind of interest, because this is essentially a dollar account earning money in dollars, repatriable in dollars. So there is no currency risk of any kind in that. There is a fourth kind of account for people who are returning back from the US to come to settle in India, like myself. When you come back to India and settle here, when you become a resident of India, you no longer can hold any of these accounts. And if you still want to hold your money in US dollars or any foreign currency, there is another type of account called RFC, Resident Foreign Currency Account. that is available to people who previously had an NRE or a FCNR account who subsequently became residents of India who want to keep money in foreign currency. RFC accounts operate very much similar to FCNR accounts, and the money can be repatriated back to the US when you want to go back to the US. There are tax implications in all these accounts as well. Non-resident external account returns are not taxed in India. They are tax-free in India. The non-resident ordinary account is taxed like a regular resident account. And of course, the FCNR doesn't carry any tax in India. However, this non-resident account returns and the FCNR returns are taxable in the US for US citizens because US citizens are required to disclose global income. So I know that it gets confusing at some point saying what is tax free in India and what is tax free in the US and combination of that. So the best advice I would give you is to consult with your tax advisor, both in the US and India. There are companies that offer tax advice for both countries. They have people who are experts in US taxes as well as expert in Indian taxes. I have one such company in Chennai which does my US taxes and India taxes. The advantage of going with them is that you had to submit all your data only once, and these people know what investments in India are taxable in the US and vice versa. This is better than going with the individual tax accountant in the US and a separate one in India because those two guys don't know how the other one operates, and you have to be the arbitrator in between trying to arbitrate between who does what, etc. All that. So in my experience, I used to have a separate tax accountant in the US and separate in India, and finally I decided to go with one company. There are not very many companies who offer this kind of joint service. So I would you had to look into that. There are a few that I know of who do a pretty good job. It is a lot more expensive to file taxes as a US citizen, both in India and the US, because a lot of compliance forms you have to fill. So keep in mind that investments will also carry some tax cost issues as well. In terms of mutual funds, there are 8 mutual funds that accept investment from the US right now. DHFL, Birla, ICICI, SBI, etc. There are a lot more mutual funds who do not accept money from the US. This is a current list of funds that offer that accept investment from US citizens and US NRIs. Most of these funds are run by very large investment fund companies, and they offer a very good return. So one it's not included here is the HDFC fund. They also accept investment from the US citizens. In my experience, I found that the mutual fund companies are the best in terms of risk management as well as asset diversification. You don't have to worry much about what happens there. You get reported on a regular basis. The tax handling of mutual funds is also fairly straightforward. The returns are also fairly attractive compared to fixed deposits or other forms of instruments. So if you're going to start out new, I would say start off with some NRE, NRO accounts just to get your feet in the water, feet wet, and then move on to mutual funds, which could be good places to park your money. The third one is direct equity. There are certain restrictions in terms of how you can hold direct equity. For NRIs and for US citizens, an NRE or NRO account is required, which is dedicated only for this purpose. You can have NRE and NRA account not for a fixed deposit, but that cannot be used for this. You have to have a dedicated NRE NRO account for the purposes of what is called PIS. PIS stands for Portfolio Investment Schemes. So if you want to own direct equity in India, you have to open a portfolio investment scheme with one of these mutual fund companies, and you have to have a dedicated NRE or NRO account, which is primarily and only tied to this PIS purposes. The idea being that option trading in India is still not fully established for foreign citizens and NRIs. Option trading is available for Indian citizens. If you're going to be doing some option trading under your PIS scheme, then you need to have this direct thing. What they don't allow at this point in time is margin account trading for foreign citizens. It is now in the works, but the NRE NRO accounts is mainly held for sell and buy. When you sell a security, the money has to be deposited back to the NRE NRO account. When you buy, you have to use the money available there to repurchase the stock that you want to purchase. You also need a dematerialized account. Dematerialized account is a paperless account where you don't need no longer you need to hold paper shares. Dematerialized account gives you the ability to hold the shares electronically. You need that as well for holding direct equity. Previously, they had an option of either having a dematerialized account or holding your own shares, but now it has become mandatory to have a dematerialized account. It's a different kind of bank account that most mutual fund companies and banks offer. And if you're going to do any straight trading, then you need a SEBI account, a SEBI trading account. You can have it either through yourself, you can register yourself as a broker, or you can work with a registered broker. So all these three are required. A direct equity purchase involves an NRE account, an NRO account, a dematerialized account, as well as a SEBI trading account with a registered broker, or your own registered broker account for yourself. Moving on to real estate. Real estate is a good long-term. You guys can hear me?
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Okay. In terms of real estate, itself is a good long-term investment with steady growth. Uh, the only catch here is that as a US citizen or NRI, make sure that the type of bank account that you use is appropriate for the particular investment. If you're going to buy real estate in India with your US dollars and you want the money back in US dollars when you sell the property, then you need to essentially have an NRE account or FCNR account in order for you to repatriate the money. If you transfer money in NRO account and buy a property, you no longer can take the money back in dollars. Now, the choice of whether to put in NRE, NRO, and take the money back is also based on various factors. The appreciation value for the property is the same regardless of what kind of investment you use, but the repatriation of the money will be different depending upon what kind of account that you use here. The rules applicability will determine how much money will be allowed to come into the country. If you're going to buy in foreign currency, there's a certain limit of how much money you can bring to buy real estate versus buying property with money in India. The last item I want to cover here is bonds and non-convertible debentures. These are basically bonds either offered by the public sector undertakings of the government of India or from corporate companies. There are PSU bonds as well as non-convertible debentures and perpetual bonds. Perpetual bonds are places where the bonds automatically mature, where you buy a 5-year bond and then if you don't liquidate the bond, it automatically matures. Whereas the PSU bond is a fixed term instrument that matures at the end of the investment. The next set of instruments is government securities. T-bills, similar to the T-bills in the US, have maturities ranging from 3 months to 12 months. You buy it in the Reserve Bank of India auctions. But if you're looking for a long-term investment strategy, I think then the best way to look at is fixed rate government bonds, floating rate government bonds, and capital index bonds. Each one of them have a specific criteria to invest, but all of them are available to US citizens and NRIs. Uh, the fixed rate bonds are, as the name says, is a rate is fixed for the period of the term. The floating rate bonds are bonds where the rate changes depending upon the interest rate. It could go up or down depending upon the interest rate changes. Some of these fixed rate bonds are also tradable in the secondary market. You can buy the bond and then trade in the secondary market with the dematerialized account. And then, of course, you have capital index bonds. In this case, the bonds have a coupon payment or interest rate payment based on the inflation rates of the Indian market. Depending on the inflation rate, the capital index bonds change, and you could have variable interests available to you at various points in time. Usually, the indexation happens on a monthly or a quarterly basis. Then we also have certificate of deposit. This is a fixed deposit that is something that you can sell. A typical bank fixed deposit is something that you own and you can't sell it unless the deposit matures, you get your money back. A certificate of deposit is an instrument which is similar to a fixed deposit, but you can actually sell that deposit before the end of the term. You of course need a dematerialized account to buy and sell CDs. And if the CD is held by you at the time of maturity, you get the maturity money back. Whoever is holding the CD in the time will get the money back. So it's basically like a tradable fixed deposit, if you will. Of course, we have national pension schemes. These are national pension schemes are primarily for Indian citizens only. So US citizens cannot trade in NPS, cannot buy NPS. US NRIs, Indian citizens who live in the US can buy NPS. There are a couple of accounts, tier 1 account and tier 2 account. There are various conditions and conditions underneath that. I'm not going to go through that in detail, but basically the idea here is that this is a private pension scheme. For people who are employed in India and Indian companies, there is a government provident fund, much like your 401k. 401k is privately offered by US companies, whereas employee provident fund is money that is offered by the government, where the companies have to put certain amount of money out of your pre-tax income into the amount. This is the retirement nest egg for people working in India. The National Pension Scheme is a secondary alternate to that, where in addition to the EPF, you can also have your own pension scheme where you put money when you are working, and you can take the money out in various forms post-retirement. So there are again certain rules and conditions in terms of when you can take the money. If you take the money before 60 years of age, then you have certain penalties you have to pay, much like your 401k or your IRA in the US. The basic definition and the basic approach is the same as an IRA or a 401k, but the actual rules and conditions are different. It's a little bit more complicated here in India than how IRAs or NRIs work in, or IRAs or 401ks working in the US. In terms of tax implications, this will be my last slide. As I said, there is a US tax compliance. If you're going to have investments in India, and particularly if you are a US citizen or a US green card holder, you have tax compliance issues. First is the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, the FATCA Act I mentioned earlier. You are required to disclose every single investment you have in every foreign currency to the US government every single year. That specifically applies to India because India and US have a bilateral FATCA agreement. This is a very long form, a form 8938 that you have to fill every year, which has to detail out all the investments that you have in India, the bank name, the bank address, the bank amount you have, etc., all that. This is a fairly complex form, and if you don't fill this form, if you miss out investments, that would be liable for criminal actions in India. So Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act forms are important. In addition to the Foreign Account Tax Compliance, you also have to file what is called an FBAR. This FBAR form used to be previously called TDF 90.1. Some of you who have been filing taxes for a long time in the US would probably know of TDF 90.1. TDF 90.1 was replaced by FBAR. Now FBAR is also an online form. This is again a report of foreign bank and financial accounts. FBAR data is very similar to what is there in FATCA, but the FBAR has to be filed with a different organization versus FATCA, which is filed with the US IRS. The FBAR is filed with the Treasury Department, whereas the FATCA is filed with the US IRS. So you have to send it to different places. The deadline for filing both of them are April 15th. Previously, the FATCA filed along with the US IRS, the deadline was April 15th, but the FBAR deadline used to be June 30th, but starting in 2019, they made them both due on April 15th. So if you have any investments in India, then you need to file both a foreign account tax compliant form with the IRS as well as the FBAR account with with the US Treasury. Again, these forms are downloadable and fillable online, but I would certainly and seriously advise you to go with a tax advisor because these forms have to be filled a certain way. The way you report different investments is also different. If you have VCP funds, if you have real estate funds, the reporting is much complicated for that. In addition to the compliance, you also have tax implications, short and long-term capital gains. As I said, long-term capital gains may not be taxable in India, but the long-term capital gains from investments in India are very much taxable in the US. And similarly, vice versa, dividend income in the US may not be taxable in the US, but they're very much taxable in India. And as US citizens, you have to report global income. And when you ever come back to India and become an Indian resident, if you're a US citizen and an Indian resident, that's double whammy because as a US citizen, you have to report all global income. As an Indian resident, also you have to report global income and pay tax on global income. The only silver lining here is that US and India also have what is called a DTAA, Double Taxation Avoidance Agreement, by which US and India allow people like who have a US citizenship and resident in India like myself to choose primary country of residence. In my case, it is India. So I pay tax in India like anybody else on global income. But when I file my US taxes, I can either get a foreign income exclusion or a foreign tax credit. Again, the choice of a foreign tax exclusion, or a foreign tax credit is subject to your own tax situation. Your tax advisor is the best person to determine which one works the best for you. But this is only for US citizens. For US NRIs, you of course have to file taxes in the US. You don't have to file taxes in India, but if you have income in India, then you have to file taxes in India as well. What the US NRIs don't have to do is if you have income in the US, you do not have to file taxes in India. But for income you have in India, then you of course have to file taxes in India. So be careful that just because you're NRI doesn't mean your investments in India are tax free. And of course, tax in India for income derived in India applies to both US citizens as well as for NRIs. Okay, consult tax expert in the US taxes, India taxes. If you guys need help with that, I can try and point out to some people who I know of who are able to help you with this kind of things. Okay, that's all I had. I hope it was useful for you guys, and I tried to cover everything at an extremely high satellite level. Now, the details are all hidden inside. Again, this is just to get an idea about various opportunities available for you guys to invest in India. And then, if there is anything that I can help in terms of my knowledge, I'm happy to help. If you can reach out to me. But what I would recommend is that find a good financial advisor in India who can help you with investments in India, and find a good one in the US who can help with investments in the US, and find someone who can do taxes in both countries together.
Wish there are a couple of questions in the chat if you can see them. Otherwise, I can read them out to you.
Can you read them out, Shanta?
Sure. Aravindan asks, are broad market index funds doing formulaic investing and correspondingly low fees available?
Yes, there are index funds available in India, much like the Vanguard Index Fund. Their fee is AMC, the account management fee is much less. Those funds basically mirror some of the indices here, similar to the S&P 500. Here they mimic the Nifty index. There is also an index that mirrors the Sensex, which is similar to your Dow Jones Industrial. Those mutual funds have much lower fees, and in most cases, these funds actually beat managed funds as well. So I would say that one of the safer investments is to put a good amount of money in this funds that track the index.
All right. Karthik has a question. For couples planning return to India, are there advantages in one spouse retaining Indian citizenship and the other getting the US citizenship?
That's a very good question. From an investment standpoint, depending on whose name you're going to invest. If you're going to invest in your wife's name in India when she's an Indian citizen, then she no longer has to pay US taxes. A person who's a US citizen, so there is some advantage if you choose to invest in the Indian citizen's name in India and a US citizen's name in the US. But if you're both residents of India, the US citizen's investment is also taxable in India, whereas the Indian citizen's investment in India is not taxable in the US. If that makes any sense to you guys. So there are some advantages of that. Now, of course, from a travel perspective, an Indian citizen in India cannot travel to US unless they are a green card holder. If you're a green card holder, US laws are also changing as we speak in terms of how they're going to tax US permanent residents. So you have to be careful to make sure that the tax implications for US permanent residents are accounted for different from non-US citizens and non-Indian and non-NRIs as well. So be careful with that. Again, as a tax advisor, in most cases, permanent residents are considered like US citizens from a tax standpoint.
And I also heard you mention about starting company. A couple with one Indian citizen and a US citizen could start a company if they want to.
Yes. Absolutely, yes. Absolutely. That's the advantage of having someone an Indian citizen. Absolutely, yes. You can do that. A lot of people do that as well. Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right. Naveen wants to know, if US citizen buys a house in India and lives there, can he use the dollars to buy the property, or is there any restriction in the amount?
You can use dollars to buy the property, to buy the house in India. But if you want to take the money back in dollars, when you sell the property, then the money has to come through an NRE account. So you have to bring the money from the US via NRE account and use the money from the NRE account to buy the property. And then when you finish selling the house, you can repatriate the money back in dollars. If you want to keep
what about
the money,
capital gains tax? What about capital gains tax on that?
Capital gains tax applies in India as well as in the US for that, because what they treat this is that they treat it as a regular investment, regardless of how the revenue you took. They take it as a regular thing, and they tax the capital gains is taxed in India, and it's also taxed in the US. But then if you have DTA, you can avoid by filing taking some foreign tax credit in one.
There's no real benefit of buying it through an NRE account. Whether you buy through NRE or local, you still have to pay the same capital gains tax.
From a capital gains perspective, yes, but from the point of repatriation, if you want to take the money back in dollars, then you have to bring the money through NRE. Because some people who want to buy and then take the money back.
Oh, okay. So if you don't buy through NRE, if you buy through local funds, then you cannot even take it out of the country, is it?
Correct. Exactly.
Oh, okay.
Now, let me add another caveat there. Within India, if you are a resident of India, there is a Reserve Bank of India scheme called LRS, Liberalized Remittance Scheme. What that LRS does is that for residents in India, regardless of your nationality, you are allowed to take $250,000 to the US to do things in the US, whether you want to invest in the US or if you want to buy property in the US or if you want to just spend the money in the US, etc. All that. So when you have money here in India in rupees, this again applies to anybody in India. You don't have to be a US citizen. You don't have to be an NR. Even residents in India can do that. Previously, this kind of facility was only available for medical purposes and education purposes, but now you can apply it for any purpose. You can use it for investments in the US. It's LRS scheme. The actual amount that is allowed in the LRS scheme to take from India to the US changes on a yearly basis. It has not changed in the last 5 years. It has been held at $250,000 per person. If you have two people here, then you can take 250K per person from India to the US every year. So there is one way of taking the money back. Even if you invest money in property in India, that is one way of taking it back through LRS scheme to the US as well.
And you have to pay 5% tax now, isn't it? The LRS, they've introduced 5% from this year, January onwards, isn't it?
This
Something
year,
like
yes. Starting in 2021, they are charging, I don't know what percentage it is, but there's a certain amount of percentage they're charging on that. Previously, it was free, totally free of cost.
Yeah.
I think now they're charging some money for that. I don't know the exact amount though.
So what if the money comes from our ancestral properties, my selling property of parents' properties, like our inheritance, that's sold for, let's say it's $200,000, that can be repatriated?
I am not sure of that. I haven't encountered that condition, so I'm not sure of that. My guess would be that it's non-repatriable. That would be my guess. But I think I have not.
That means the money has to sit. That means the money has to sit in India forever.
Yeah, I think so, because I don't know the exact details. Maybe through the LRS scheme, we can take some money back in dollars out of the proceeds of the sale. But in terms of straight repatriation, I don't believe it's allowed. But again, that's best to consult with someone who's an expert in that.
No worries.
Ancestral property is something that you have to be very careful how you handle, particularly if it is multiple owners. One owner being a US citizen, other owners being Indian citizen, there are certain things you can and cannot do with that. So be careful with that. How you handle that as well.
Okay, sir.
There are a couple more questions.
Sure.
So if as a US citizen, I work for a US firm, but living in India, will I have to pay tax in India for the income earned in dollars?
If you are an expat, if you live here in India as an expat, see, when I moved back from the US to India, I was a US expat. So I was getting paid in US dollars. I was living in India. For the first few years, I did not have to pay any tax in India because I was considered, first year is considered a non-resident of India, because the way they define tax in India is that you have to be either a resident of India, and there are rules that define how you are treated as a resident in India, depending on how many days you have stayed in a particular financial year and how many days you have stayed in the previous 7 financial years. So you have to pass a test which decides if you are going to be a tax resident in India or not. When you first come here from the US and you get paid in US dollars, you are a non-resident because you haven't spent any time in India. During that time, your income in the US is not taxable in India. After that, you move into a status called RNOR, resident but not ordinary resident. A strange way of defining people who are residents but not ordinary residents. When you're in an RNOR status, that normally kicks in the second year of your stay here, you still don't pay tax on US income in US dollars. But you do pay interest on any income you get here in Indian currency. Because some companies offer you income in US dollars as well as in Indian currency. The expat deal that I got had money only in US dollars. So I did not pay taxes for the first 3 years when I moved back to India. I only paid taxes in the US.
Great.
Does it answer the question?
Naveen, that was your question. Do you?
Yeah. So after 3 years, what happens? Sorry.
You have to pay tax like Indian residents. You have to pay tax in Indian residents on global income. So you have to report your US tax and US income in dollars, Indian income in rupees, any income in any currency anywhere in the world, and then you have to pay tax in India on those amount as well.
One last question. I think we are over time. Aravindan says, my understanding of the double taxation treaty is that you have to pay the higher tax rate of the two countries for a given activity. Is that accurate? For example, if long-term capital gains tax rate is 10% in US and 8% in India, you have to pay that 10% for long-term cap gains from India.
I'm not quite sure about that because you have to decide which is your primary tax country. So you basically have to pay taxes in the primary tax country and take the deductions in the other country. That is how I understand it. So even if I'm living in India and my long-term capital gains in India is lower, I still pay the lower capital gains is what I understand. Because you have to fix the primary country and do everything based in the primary country and take the deduction of the credit in the foreign country. But again, it's best to consult with the tax advisor. That's what I've been doing at least so far, paying tax in India and taking credit in the US.
All right, I think that probably answers all the questions. I want to thank you, Vish. Your early morning Saturday, giving that up for fellow alumni, and really appreciate that. So please give him an applause from everybody. I don't think you can see many of you, but yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Vish. Well done. Thank you.
Any of you have any further questions? I've given my email address in the presentation at the end. You can write to me, and if I have the answer, I can give you the answer. If I don't have the answer, I'll connect. Again, second thing is, if you want help with someone to help you with your investments or taxes in India, I can give you some references of people who can help you with that. Because I would say that go it alone approach in India is not a good idea. Right. I tried that initially, and I learned it very fast.
One last thing, Naveen wanted to know if you want to have a Telegram or a WhatsApp group for continued discussion on this topic. And my suggestion, Naveen, is go ahead and start one, and you can reach out to me, and I will give you whatever contact I have from those who registered, and we can get that going.
Not a problem. Not a problem. Certainly, yes. Happy to do that.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for your time.
Have a good rest of the day, Vish, and good night to everybody else.
Happy
Thank
investing,
you,
guys.
Thank
Happy
you.
investing.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you. Bye.